Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
Imagine you are in Toronto, a very busy city in Canada. You see many people hurrying on the streets. Cars, buses, and streetcars fill the roads. 6 million people live in this area. It is a place full of noise and movement. If you drive on Canada's busiest road, you will see many trucks carrying goods. This part of Canada, with its big cities like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, is what most people know. It is where almost all Canadians live. But this busy part is very small. Most people live in a narrow area. This area is close to the border with the United States. In fact, more than 66% of Canadians live less than 100 kilometers from the U.S. border. If we look at 160 kilometers from the border, almost all of Canada's 41 million people live there. Now, think about this. Canada is the second largest country in the world. It is a huge land, almost 10 million square kilometers. But 90% of this huge country is almost empty. It has very few people. Imagine flying over Canada for hours and seeing only trees, lakes, and rocks. You might not see any towns or even small houses. For example, Nunavut is Canada's largest territory. It is about 2 million square kilometers. This is almost as big as all of Western Europe. But fewer than 40,000 people live in Nunavut. This means only a tiny number of people live in this vast land. This is a striking fact. It makes us ask a central question. Why is the world's second largest country so empty? Why do almost all Canadians live in such a small part of their land? In this book, we will explore the reasons behind this great emptiness. 2. A very big country. Canada is truly a huge country. It is the second largest on Earth. But most of its land has very few people. The country's population is highly concentrated. Most Canadians live very close to the United States border. About 66% live within 100 kilometers of it. If you look at an area about 160 kilometers north of the border, you will find most of Canada's 41 million people. This small area holds more than 70% of the population. It covers less than 3% of the country's land. This means that about 90% of Canada is almost empty. This is a shocking scale of emptiness for such a large nation. To understand this scale, think about Nunavut. It is Canada's largest territory. Nunavut covers about 2 million square kilometers. This is 20% of the whole country. But fewer than 40,000 people live there. This means there are only 0.02 people for every square kilometer. Nunavut alone is nearly as large as all of Western Europe combined. Imagine a land almost the size of many European countries together, yet with a population smaller than a medium-sized town. If you drive north from a big city like Edmonton, the cities thin out quickly. The busy streets and tall buildings fade away. The boreal forest closes in, vast and green. Keep going, and the paved roads mostly disappear, replaced by gravel or dirt tracks. You enter the vast Canadian Shield. This is a huge area of ancient, billion-year-old rock that wraps around Hudson Bay. It covers more than half of Canada. It is 8 million square kilometers of granite, towering pine trees, black spruce, and 10 million sparkling lakes. These lakes were carved out by massive glaciers long, long ago. This is the Canada that many people imagine, endless, silent, and wild. It is a country where you can fly for hours and see nothing but trees and water below. Whole regions here, as big as countries like France, have fewer people living in them than a single subway station in a city like Toronto during busy times. This shows how quickly civilization stops and the great, untouched emptiness of Canada begins, just a short drive from the busiest towns. 3. The hard land. One of the main reasons why much of Canada is empty is because of the land itself. A huge part of the country is covered by what is called the Canadian Shield. This area has very hard ground made of ancient rock. Some of this rock is over 4 billion years old, making it one of the oldest places on Earth. This hard rock is mostly granite. The Canadian Shield covers more than half of Canada, stretching like a giant curved shape around Hudson Bay. It is a vast, ancient, and often unforgiving landscape. Many millions of years ago, during the Ice Age, very large sheets of ice, known as glaciers, moved slowly over the land. These huge ice sheets were like giant tools that scraped the earth with immense power. They pushed away most of the soft, fertile soil that had built up over long periods. When the glaciers finally melted, they left behind mostly bare, hard rock. They also carved out and filled millions of lakes across this rocky landscape, creating a land of exposed granite and endless water. The soil that remains on the Canadian Shield is very thin and poor. It often lies directly on top of the bedrock. This soil is frequently sandy, full of small stones, and has too much acid, which makes it difficult for most plants to grow well. Good farms need rich, deep soil that can hold water and nutrients. For example, soil for successful farming should ideally be at least 30 centimeters deep and have a balanced pH. The Canadian Shield simply does not offer this kind of fertile land needed for large-scale agriculture. Because of this thin, poor soil and the hard rock close to the surface, it is almost impossible to have large farms in the Shield. People cannot grow enough food to support big communities. This is very different from Canada's prairie regions, which, even though they are located in northern latitudes, have rich soils that came from ancient glacial deposits. These prairies are excellent for growing crops. The hard geology of the Canadian Shield creates a significant natural barrier. It prevents large settlements and makes it extremely difficult for many people to live and work there, explaining why this vast area remains largely uninhabited. 4. The cold weather. Chapter 3 talked about Canada's hard land. Now let's look at the weather. This is another big reason why so much of Canada is empty. The climate makes it very difficult for people to live and work in many parts of the country. One major factor is permafrost. About half of Canada's land area sits on permafrost. This means the ground is permanently frozen. It stays at 0 degrees Celsius or colder for at least 2 years in a row. In the far northern areas where the cold is very deep, this frozen layer can extend hundreds of meters down into the earth. For example, in parts of the high Arctic, it can be 400 to 600 meters deep. This frozen ground creates huge problems for building. When people build houses, roads, or pipelines, heat can transfer into the ground. This heat makes the permafrost melt. When the frozen ground turns to mud, it becomes unstable. Buildings can crack, roads can buckle, and structures can even collapse. To avoid this, engineers must use special, expensive methods. They might build structures on stilts to keep them off the ground, or use special cooling systems. Because of these difficulties, building anything in Canada's north costs a lot more money. Studies show it can be 2 to 2.5 times more expensive to build a mine in the north than in the south. Operating these places is also much more costly. Getting around in the north is also hard. Roads are often few and far between. Many places rely on ice roads during winter. These roads are built on frozen lakes and rivers, but they can only be used for a few months when it's very cold. In summer, they melt. Other ways to transport goods, like by boat or plane, are very expensive and often depend on the season. This makes life in the north very challenging. The climate itself is very harsh. The Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut have average yearly temperatures below freezing. Winters are incredibly long and cold. In places like Tuktoyaktuk on the Arctic coast, winter temperatures can fall to -40 degrees Celsius. It can stay this cold for many weeks. Summers are very short and cool. The growing season, when plants can grow, is often less than 90 days without frost. This is not enough time for most common crops to grow and ripen. Farmers cannot easily grow food like wheat, corn, or many vegetables. In contrast, the Canadian prairies, though also quite north, have longer summers and better soil. This allows them to grow a lot of wheat. But in the vast northern parts of Canada, the frozen ground and extreme cold mean farming is nearly impossible. These combined climate problems mean fewer people can settle and build a life there. 5. Following the train. Canada's story is tied to its past. To understand why much of the country is empty, we must look at how it was built. Long ago, people settled in Canada near water. Rivers like the St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes were important. They were like roads, helping people move and trade goods. Cities such as Montreal and Toronto grew near these waterways. The land in the south had better soil and warmer weather. This made it good for farming and for people to live. A very important part of Canada's history is the Canadian Pacific Railway. This big train line was finished in the year 1885. The government wanted to connect the country from one ocean to the other. Prime Minister John A. Macdonald planned this railway. It was not just for moving things, it was a tool to build the nation. He wanted to bring people to the western parts of Canada. This would help make Canada stronger and stop American expansion into those areas. The railway was built in the south of the country. This was a clear and important choice. The southern parts had good land for farms. The soil was fertile, meaning it could grow a lot of food. But the north had too much rock and ice. This made farming impossible there. The railway brought many new people to Canada, often from Europe. The government gave the Canadian Pacific Railway a very large amount of land, about 25 million acres. The railway also worked hard to bring settlers. They offered special packages that included a trip on a ship, a ride on the train, and cheap land for sale, sometimes for just $2.50 an acre. These new settlers did not go everywhere in Canada. They followed the train tracks closely. New towns like Regina, Calgary, and Edmonton started along the railway line. These towns grew into important cities in the West. The railway showed people exactly where to live and where to build their homes and businesses. It decided where grain would be stored, where goods would move, and where commerce would happen. Because the railway stayed in the south, the vast northern lands were mostly left unsettled. The north was too hard to reach by train, and it was not good for growing food. Therefore, it did not seem useful for new farms or towns. This historical path shaped Canada. Most people came to live in a narrow strip along the southern border where the railway ran. The history of this important train line largely explains why the North remained so empty for a long time. It created the pattern we see today, with most of Canada's people in the South and huge empty spaces to the north. 6. A land of many people. The idea that Canada's north was always empty is not true. Before Europeans came, many people lived there. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples have called these lands home for thousands of years. They lived across all of what we now call Canada, even in the far north. For example, the Inuit people lived in the Arctic region for 5,000 years. They had small villages and hunting areas. They moved with the seasons to find food. These indigenous peoples understood the land well. Their way of life was perfect for the environment. The North had fewer resources than the South, so people had to move often. They followed animal herds like caribou and found seals and fish. They lived in a way that respected the land and its limits.
This helped them survive and thrive for a very long time. But then Europeans arrived. This changed everything. Many new diseases came with them, like smallpox and measles. These diseases were very dangerous for indigenous people. Sadly, up to 90% of some indigenous populations died. After this, European governments made new rules for the land.
They called these colonization. The Canadian government made laws like the Indian Act. They also signed agreements called treaties. These agreements often took land from indigenous peoples. They were given small areas called reserves, which were sometimes not good for farming or hunting. In some cases, whole communities were forced to move from their homes. There was also the residential school system. For more than 100 years, many indigenous children were taken from their families. They were sent to these schools to forget their own cultures and languages. This caused great pain and damage. Because of these actions, disease, forced moves, and bad government policies, the North became very different. The idea of an empty land grew, but it was not empty. Its first people were pushed aside. Their numbers became smaller. The land was then called wilderness for new people to use. So the North is empty today, not because people could not live there, but because its first people were sadly displaced. 7. Money and work. Today, Canada's big cities in the South are like strong magnets. They pull people in because of many job opportunities and better services. Cities such as Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver offer numerous jobs, especially in finance and technology sectors. They also have excellent schools, modern hospitals, and good public transport. This concentration of opportunities makes people want to move there, and businesses prefer to set up shop in these areas. The Greater Toronto Area alone makes more than 20% of Canada's total money. This creates a cycle. More people mean more investment, which brings in even more people. Over 60% of Canada's economic activity happens in these urban centers, even though they cover less than 1% of the country's land. Because of this, young people from smaller northern towns often move south, looking for better chances. When they leave, many northern communities get older and shrink in size. Building anything in Canada's north is very expensive. It costs much more to build new roads, houses, or mines there compared to the south. One main reason is the extremely cold weather and the permanently frozen ground known as permafrost. This makes construction difficult and risky because the ground can become unstable. For example, building a new mine in the north can cost more than twice as much as building the same mine in a southern area. Providing basic services like internet is also a huge challenge. Only about half of the homes in northern Canada have fast internet speeds. Running fiber optic cables over long distances through frozen and hard-to-reach land is very costly. Energy is another big expense. Many northern communities depend on diesel generators for electricity. This fuel must be flown in or brought by sea, making it very costly. People living in remote northern areas can pay 6 to 10 times more for energy than those in the rest of Canada. This lack of good and affordable infrastructure stops new businesses from growing. Because of these very high costs for building and living, companies that extract resources like minerals, oil, and gas have changed how they operate in the north. They no longer build permanent towns for their workers. Instead, they use a fly-in, fly-out system. Workers fly to a mine or site, live in temporary camps for shifts lasting a few weeks, and then fly back to their homes, which are usually in southern cities. This means that the money made from these resources mostly goes south. The main offices of these companies are in big cities, and most of the profits and jobs benefit people living far away from the north. This system means the north stays rich in resources, but it struggles to grow its population and economy in the long term. It becomes a place where valuable goods are taken out, but not enough investment or jobs stay to help local communities truly develop. 8. The future of the North. The northern parts of Canada are changing quickly. The Arctic is getting warmer, much faster than other places. This makes sea ice melt, and permafrost, the ground that stays frozen, also thaw. These changes bring both difficulties and new chances. One problem is that thawing permafrost can damage buildings and roads. Homes in places like Tuktoyaktuk become unstable. This also makes travel harder. Ice roads, which are vital for bringing supplies, are less safe now. But there are also new possibilities. The warming means the Northwest Passage, a sea route, is open longer each year. This could help ships travel faster between continents. Also, longer warm seasons might mean new kinds of crops could grow in the north. Some people wonder if technology, like fast internet, could help more people live in the north. The idea is to work from home for companies in southern cities. This could allow them to enjoy northern life. However, good internet is very expensive to install in distant places. Even with better internet, northern towns often do not have many services. They might lack big hospitals, many schools, or a lot of shops. So just having the internet may not be enough to attract many new residents. Canada now faces important decisions about its northern lands. Should it spend a lot of money to build roads, ports, and towns there? This could show Canada's strong claim to the Arctic. But such projects would be costly and could harm the environment. They could also change the traditional ways of life for indigenous peoples who have lived there for thousands of years. Or should Canada mainly protect these areas as wild spaces? The North is not truly empty. It is full of history, unique nature, and the culture of its first people. Canada must decide if its empty spaces are a problem to fix or a unique part of its identity to keep safe. What do you think Canada should do with its northern lands in the future?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.